There are 5 basic guidelines to help you compose your shots. Now, they are not hard and fast rules designed to limit your creative ability. Not every guideline applies to every situation. But they are a place to start, and learning to master their principles is where creative freedom begins. The first of the guidelines is simplicity. Don't complicate your shots by placing primary subjects against congested backgrounds, and don't try to have too much going on in the shot. Each scene should have a single, simple story to tell. Often, as in these examples, that may mean altering camera position, the size of the image, or, when possible, selecting the best background. Beware of the merger. Lines or objects that cut through your subject as though the two were merging are a common background problem. They not only distract the viewer, but mergers also accent the two-dimensional quality of video and just plain don't look good. Remember, keeping it simple is not always simple, but it is always important. Now, let's get to the most basic issue. You know the scene you want and the subject, but where do you position the subject in the frame? There's no end of choices. Anybody can tell that's wrong, that too, and even that doesn't seem quite right. Most people give up and figure if they put the subject right in the middle, they can't be too far off. And they're right. They aren't too far off. They're off just enough to lose the opportunity for truly good composition. The rule of thirds has been a standard guideline for composition since the ancient Greeks used it to proportion their statues and buildings. The world of photography and video has long since adapted the principle and found it just as useful as it was then. Mentally divide the frame into thirds, horizontally and vertically. Then simply position your subject where 2 of the lines cross. The point you choose depends on the feeling you're after, how the shot will relate to the next one, and the other elements you wish to include. Framing is another guideline of composition which can add appeal to your shots. Use your eye and look for frames within frames, like these. As you've seen with the first 3 guidelines, the most important function of composition is to direct the viewer's eye to the central story in each shot. The concept of leading lines is a handy device that takes care of that job in a most pleasing manner by leading the viewer to the subject. It's easy to make lines work for you, but you have to look. They come in all shapes and sizes.
Don't allow a line to cut a shot directly in the middle. Do remember, the best starting point for a line is usually the left-hand side, because our eyes are trained to read left to right.
Balance is an important consideration in any creative effort. In video composition, it can be broken down into 2 areas: the balance between the objects in the frame and the balance of light and color. Balancing objects in your shots doesn't necessarily mean equal weights. It simply means your frame needs to be rounded out and used well. These are the 5 rules of composition, but remember, they're only guidelines designed to be flexible, creative tools. Practice them, and they'll come as naturally as looking through your viewfinder. Another key to good composition is the camera angle. Angles have a great impact on making shots appear 3-dimensional. Flat angles make the scene appear flat. With a slight change, you can give the shot depth, as well as provide more visual information. Angles can also have a psychological impact on your viewer. For example, when the camera and the subject are on an equal level, your viewer will have a sense of equality with the subject. Make it higher, and the subject gets smaller and seemingly less important. Move to a lower angle, and the size and importance of the subject is magnified. No matter how simple the action, there is a potential story composed of simple actions and simple reactions. And along with each story, there is always a simple plot with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Telling a videotape story uses everything you've learned so far about setting up a shot and then goes a step further. It lets you put shots together into a sequence and sequences into a smooth and logical story. It's what's called continuity, and it's easy to learn when you begin at the beginning. As director, your responsibilities are many, but they come down to putting ideas and visuals together in a way that makes aesthetic sense. Your first responsibility is always your audience. Losing them is the worst thing a storyteller can do. It's all in your frame. Through it, the audience will view all story action, but remember, they're getting it secondhand. They're depending upon you. What you put in here is what they get. So think logically, and remember to tell a story. All story action breaks down into sequences. They're the basic units of storytelling, like paragraphs, really. And each sequence has 3 all-important elements, all vital to getting your story across. First, you establish the setting. Let your viewer get his bearings and orient him to the action that will follow. It's called the long shot. Next, you move in closer and set up the medium shot. Remember, your lens is the audience's eye. You've got to be thinking for them always. Of all the possibilities in the long shot, you've zeroed in on some specific action. The medium shot gets you down to business. And then, on to the payoff, the most expressive of the 3 basic continuity shots, the close-up. It holds the greatest viewer impact. It reveals the subject's thoughts and emotions. It's definitely your most important shot. But let's back up a minute. Notice between the wide shot, medium, and a close-up, the camera angle changes by at least 45 degrees. You should always try to move your camera by at least that far.
The general rule. The general rule of continuity states when shooting a sequence, be sure to change the size of the image, or change the angle, or both, in between every new shot. The general rule.
The general rule is a tough one to live up to, but there are a couple of other types of shots you can count on to get you through. They're called cut-ins and cutaways. Cut-ins are shots that cut into the central action. These are usually close-ups and focus the viewer's attention on central events. Cutaways, also referred to as reaction shots, are close-ups or medium shots that depart from the main action to show a related subject, a reaction to the central story or other action going on at the same time. Cut-ins and cutaways are valuable because they make your story more interesting, and on the practical level, they're shots you can use to cover yourself when you change angles.